Okay, so you want to know how I ended up here in my empty apartment where the only sound is the hum of the refrigerator? It started, as so many disasters do, with a mimosa-fueled brunch and the single stupidest, most arrogant sentence I have ever uttered in my 28 years. There were 5 of us crammed into a trendy little booth. Me, my best friend Janelle, and the 3 girls I was desperately trying to make my new best friends, Sasha, Brianna, and Tess. They were my spin class friends, which is just code for people I paid a fortune to sweat near. Janelle, my rock for the last decade, looked completely out of place. She clutched her black coffee mug like a life raft while the others, shimmering in their athleisure wear, debated the merits of a trip to Chilum. I saw her discomfort, her quietness, and some toxic, insecure part of my brain whispered, "You need to prove you belong here. Show them you're interesting, show them you're one of them." And that's when the poison slipped out of my mouth, disguised as a joke. I let out a breezy, fake laugh and leaned across the table, making sure I had everyone's attention. "Oh my God, Janelle, you're not going to believe this," I said, my voice dripping with performative drama. The table went quiet, perfect. "Okay, don't take this seriously at all, you know how guys are. But your Owen slid into my DMs last night. He was like, 'Kayla, you looked absolutely stunning in that red dress at the party.' I immediately tacked on the justification, the little phrase I thought would save me. 'I'm just telling you because I believe in, like, total transparency. You know I'd never hide anything from you.' I beamed, a smug, idiotic grin plastered on my face. I expected Sasha and her crew to look at me with new respect, and for Janelle to roll her eyes and say, 'Ugh, men.' But she didn't. The warmth drained from her face so fast it was like watching a light switch get flipped off. Sasha's eyes widened with a vulture-like glee, but Janelle, she just stared at me. Her expression became smooth, cold, and impenetrable like polished marble. She didn't say a word, and her silence was so loud it drowned out the entire restaurant. To truly understand why I would detonate a bomb in the middle of my own life, you have to understand the two worlds I was trying to straddle and how badly I was failing. There was the world of Janelle, and then there was the world of Sasha. Janelle and I had been inseparable since we were 18, a decade of shared history that felt as solid as bedrock. She was the yin to my chaotic yang. I was the one who would get us into trouble with some harebrained scheme. She was the one who would show up at 2 a.m. with a meticulously thought-out plan, a flask of coffee, and a look that said, "Okay, let's fix this." Her core belief, the very center of her being, was loyalty. It wasn't a casual thing for her, it was a sacred principle. You stand by your people, period. When my dad lost his job and I had to drop out of a semester of college, she worked double shifts at a grimy diner for a month to help me cover my rent. She'd slide the crumpled cash into my hand and wave off my protests. "We're a team," she'd say, and for her, that wasn't just a phrase, it was a constitution. She was my foundation, the one person I thought was as permanent as the ground beneath my feet. She celebrated my tiny victories as if they were her own and absorbed my losses without a hint of judgment. She was home, then about 6 months ago, I fell into Sasha's orbit. It was a conscious, deliberate choice. I joined this ridiculously expensive spin studio, one of those cult-like places that feels more like a nightclub with instructors who are minor celebrities and a clientele to match. Sasha was the undisputed queen bee. She was a trust fund baby who worked in PR, a job that, as far as I could tell, mostly involved taking beautifully lit pictures of her expensive lunches and calling it brand strategy. She and her friends, Brianna and Tess, were everything I thought I wanted to be. Effortlessly cool, dripping in discreet designer labels, and always talking about their next glamorous getaway to some place I could only dream of affording. Being around them was intoxicating and terrifying. I felt like a complete and utter fraud. My job in administrative support at a dental clinic, which had always been a perfectly fine, respectable job, suddenly felt profoundly, embarrassingly dull when they talked about their gallery openings and product launches. My cozy one-bedroom apartment, which I'd always loved, seemed shabby and small in comparison to the gleaming, minimalist high-rise condos they casually posted on their Instagram stories. This gnawing insecurity, this crushing environmental pressure became a constant, high-pitched hum in the back of my mind. It was a voice that whispered, "You are not enough. They're going to find you out." I was so desperate for their approval, so terrified they'd realize I was just an ordinary girl playing dress-up, that I started doing stupid, cringeworthy things. I'd laugh too loud at their inside jokes, pretending I understood the context. I'd buy clothes I couldn't afford on my credit card, wearing them once for a brunch before returning them. My misguided goal was to earn a permanent seat at their table, and I convinced myself that the currency they valued most wasn't kindness or integrity, but drama, access, and a little bit of casual cruelty. I thought that by sacrificing a piece of my real life, my real friendship, I could finally purchase their validation. In my warped, anxious mind, I saw Janelle's unwavering trust not as a treasure to be protected, but as a shiny, valuable chip I could cash in to prove my worth in this shallow, glittering new world. Back at the brunch table, the silence stretched thin and sharp. Sasha, ever the instigator, leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. Wait for real, Owen DM'd you. What did you say back, Kayla? She prodded, a hungry little smile playing on her lips. The other two, Brianna and Tess, were staring at me with the same rapt attention you'd give a car crash. I had their full, undivided focus. For a fleeting, pathetic moment, I felt a surge of victory. I did it. I'm interesting to them. That feeling evaporated when I looked back at Janelle. Her face was a blank mask, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her coffee mug. She finally spoke, her voice unnervingly calm, almost clinical. "Oh, when did he send it?" "Oh, like last night? Around midnight, I guess," I said, trying to maintain my breezy tone, though it was starting to feel forced. "And what did you reply?" she asked, her eyes locked on mine. This was the part I'd conveniently left out. "I just hearted the message," I mumbled, suddenly feeling a hot prickle of shame. "You know, just to be polite, it didn't mean anything." "You hearted it," she repeated, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. She took a slow sip of her coffee. The air crackled with tension. Then came the final, fatal question, the one that even in my self-absorbed haze I should have seen coming. "So, Kayla," she said, her voice still quiet but now laced with something steely and sharp. "You got this message last night. You could have called me, you could have texted me, you could have waited to tell me in private, but you chose to tell me now, here." In front of them, she made a subtle, dismissive gesture with her head towards Sasha and the others, who were now pretending to be fascinated by their avocado toast. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable, but I was too deep in my performance to back down. My brain, addled by insecurity and cheap mimosas, went into defensive mode. "Oh, come on, Janelle," I scoffed, trying to laugh it off. "Don't be so dramatic. We're all friends here, right? We don't have secrets. I was just being honest." That was it. That was the moment the crack in our friendship became a chasm. By calling her dramatic, I wasn't just dismissing her feelings, I was siding with them. I was telling her that their amusement was more important than her pain. In the eyes of a loyalist like Janelle, I hadn't just shared a piece of gossip. I had taken the most sacred thing between us, our trust, our private world, and I had offered it up as a sacrifice on the altar of my own vanity. I had used her relationship, her feelings, and her trust as a prop in my pathetic one-act play for social acceptance. And she saw it. God, she saw it all. The rest of the brunch was a blur of excruciating awkwardness. Janelle didn't cause a scene, she didn't cry or yell, she just shut down. She retreated into a fortress of silence so absolute that none of us dared to breach it. Sasha tried once with a chirpy "so anyway about Chalum," but the words died in the dead air. The meal ended quickly after that. Janelle calmly placed a $20 bill on the table, her exact share, not a penny more, and stood up. She looked directly at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something behind the mask. It wasn't anger, it was a deep, hollow kind of hurt. "I need some space, Kayla," she said, her voice flat and final. Then she turned and walked out of the restaurant without a backward glance. For a few hours, I was actually annoyed. How could she be so sensitive? I fumed to myself, I was just being a good friend. I sent her a text, dripping with self-righteous indignation. "Hey, I'm sorry if that was awkward, but I thought you'd want to know. Don't be mad at me for being honest." The message sat there marked delivered. An hour later, I sent another. "Jay, are you serious? You're really going to ice me out over this? It was a stupid DM." Still nothing. That's when the first real tendril of panic began to curl in my stomach. I went to her Instagram profile to see if she'd posted anything. A stark white screen greeted me, "User not found." My heart did a painful little lurch. I quickly checked Facebook. Same thing, I was blocked. I even opened Venmo, our feed, a long history of silly payments for coffee and pizza. I searched for her username, nothing. This was the beginning of the formal severance. It wasn't a fight. A fight would have been a relief. A fight implies there's something left to fight for. This was different. This was a systematic, methodical erasure. Each block was a digital door slamming shut in my face. There was no screaming match, no tearful confrontation, just the cold, efficient click of a button. One by one, the connections to her were being severed with surgical precision. My initial anger curdled into a confusing, sickening dread. The "what have I done" feeling started as a whisper and grew into a roar in my head. I sat on my couch, staring at my phone, replaying the scene at the restaurant over and over. I saw the look on her face, the predatory gleam in Sasha's eyes, and my own smug, idiotic smile. The confused regret was setting in, thick and suffocating. This wasn't just Janelle being mad. This was an amputation, and I was just beginning to realize I was the one who had held the saw. After 2 full days of a silence so complete it felt like a physical presence in my apartment, I cracked. My frantic text to Janelle remained undelivered, a string of pathetic green bubbles floating in a digital void. My calls went straight to voicemail. In a wave of desperation, I called Daniel, our mutual friend and the designated Switzerland of our social circle. His voice, when he answered, was heavy with a weariness that told me he already knew. Kayla, he sighed, and the way he said my name felt different, tinged with disappointment. Daniel, have you talked to her? Is she okay? She's blocked me on everything, I said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I know the brunch was awkward, I messed up, but this is insane. It was just a stupid DM. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him take a deep breath, the sound of someone steeling themselves to deliver bad news. This was the third-party echo, the moment my crime was read back to me by a neutral court. I talked to her, Kayla, he said, his voice gentle but firm. She's not okay. But she's resolute. Resolute, what does that mean? I asked, a cold dread washing over me. It means she's done, he said, and the finality of it hit me like a physical blow. Look, she told me what happened, and she wanted me to tell you so you'd stop trying to contact her why this is different. He paused again. These are her words, okay? She said, Kayla didn't tell me about Owen's message to protect me. She told them. She performed my potential heartbreak for an audience of strangers to impress them. She took something that should have been private and painful and turned it into social currency to buy their approval. I sank onto my couch, the phone feeling slick in my sweaty hand. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing my flimsy self-justifications. Daniel continued, his voice full of a pained sympathy that only made it worse. She said, it wasn't a mistake, Daniel, it was a choice. She chose them over me right there at that table. My friendship, my trust, was the price of her admission into their little club. And for me, loyalty isn't a sliding scale. Once that line is crossed, it's not broken, it's gone, there's nothing to fix. Hearing her logic, her clear-eyed assessment of my actions, laid out so coldly by Daniel, was devastating. It stripped away all my excuses. She wasn't being dramatic or sensitive. She had seen my betrayal for exactly what it was, a calculated act of self-interest. I hadn't just embarrassed her, I had fundamentally devalued her. I had taken our decade of history, of support, of we're a team, and I had publicly declared that it was worth less than the fleeting approval of 3 girls I barely knew. The how could this happen in my mind was finally being answered with a brutal, simple clarity, because you made it happen. The systematic isolation began almost immediately after my call with Daniel. It was a quiet, creeping plague. The first domino to fall was the annual cabin trip that Daniel organized for our core group of friends every October. The group chat, usually buzzing with plans, had gone silent. A few days later, a new, smaller group chat popped up on my phone, conspicuously missing me and one other person, Janelle. The trip was still on, just without me. No one announced my exclusion, I was simply edited out of the picture. Next, the casual social invitations dried up. The weekly trivia nights, the spontaneous movie hangs, the just because wine nights, they all vanished from my calendar. I'd see photos pop up on social media a day or two later, a smiling group of all my oldest friends, their arms around each other. There was a gaping hole where I was supposed to be. At first, I tried to reach out, sending texts like, hey, looks like you guys had fun. Wish I could have been there. The replies were always polite, brief, and noncommittal. Yeah, it was a last-minute thing, they'd say, a gentle but firm lie that was its own kind of cruelty. They weren't being mean, they were just honoring the new boundary. Janelle was the heart of our group, and I had attacked the heart. The body was now rejecting me as a foreign entity. I even felt the chill at the coffee shop we'd all frequented for years. Bari, the barista who knew all our orders by heart, used to greet me with a loud Kayla. The usual, now he just nodded curtly and asked, what can I get for you? As if I were a complete stranger, he had clearly picked a side. The final, most humiliating blow came not from a friend but from Owen. He didn't text. He sent an email, the subject line a stark, formal regarding Janelle. The message was short and brutal. Kayla, it read, I don't know what you were trying to achieve at that brunch, but you need to understand the damage you've done. My message to you was inappropriate, and I am dealing with the consequences of that with the person I love. But the way you used it to publicly humiliate Janelle for your own social gain is one of the ugliest things I've ever witnessed. She has asked me to tell you to stop all attempts to contact her. Please respect her wishes, we both need you to leave us alone. Reading it felt like having the air sucked out of my lungs. He was right, it was ugly. And in his disgust, I saw the reflection of my own actions. I hadn't just lost Janelle, I had become a villain in their story, a cautionary tale. I had pushed one domino, and now my entire social world, the one I had taken for granted, was collapsing around me in a slow, silent, agonizing cascade. Months passed. The raw, frantic panic eventually subsided, leaving behind a dull, persistent ache. The friendship with Sasha and her crew, the very prize I had paid for with Janelle's trust, fizzled out as quickly as it had begun. It turned out their interest in me was directly proportional to the amount of drama I could provide. Once the Janelle situation was no longer a juicy piece of gossip, their texts became less frequent. I was no longer a novelty, just the sad girl who had torched her own life. Our interactions became strained, superficial, and eventually they just stopped altogether. I was an island, completely of my own making. The end, the real true end, came on a Sunday afternoon in the most mundane of places, the grocery store. I was wandering down the cereal aisle, lost in my own miserable thoughts, when I heard a sound that made my heart stop. It was a laugh. Specifically, it was Janelle's laugh. That full-throated, joyful sound I hadn't heard in what felt like a lifetime. I peeked around the edge of a towering display of Cheerios, and there she was. She was standing by the dairy case with two other girls I didn't recognize. She looked happy, genuinely, radiantly happy. She was wearing an old, paint-splattered sweatshirt, her hair was in a messy bun, and she was telling a story, her hands gesturing animatedly. She leaned back and laughed again, and the girl next to her playfully shoved her shoulder. It was a moment of pure, uncomplicated friendship. The kind we used to have, she didn't see me. My first instinct was pure animal panic. I felt like a criminal, a ghost haunting a place I no longer belonged. I physically recoiled, ducking behind the shelves and scurrying down the aisle like a startled rat. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, painful rhythm. I hid there, crouched behind a wall of canned tomatoes, my breath catching in my throat. And in that humiliating moment, hiding in a grocery store, all the swirling, chaotic regret I'd been feeling finally coalesced into a single, devastatingly clear thought. I had burned down my home in a desperate attempt to be invited to a party in a house that was never meant for me. And now, the party was over, the house was empty, and my home was a pile of ashes. From the ruins, I could see Janelle walking away into a new, brighter life she had built without me. And I was left alone in the rubble, with nothing but the silence and the crushing weight of what I had done.